Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Miss Evil Knits on creativity. And I guess this is episode 5. Knitting is all about numbers. You have one stitch that becomes 2 that becomes more, and one row that becomes 2 rows and becomes more. There is measurement, centimeter, inches, and all is about numbers. And if you're going to knit, you cannot get around that. You have to do numbers. But I know that doing all the different calculations can be difficult if you don't know anything about how you can adapt your measurements into the numbers of stitches. And also if you are tired, stressed, have any stress-related conditions, doing calculation can be quite difficult. Feel that your brain doesn't work with you. And then it's really good to have someone who has done all the calculation already for you, like following a pattern or a description somehow. But these episodes that I'm making, it's not about on following patterns. It's about on creativity. And if you want to throw yourself out there and doing your own designs, modifying patterns, and so on, you need to master these numbers. You need to do the math. So doing the math is the theme of this episode. And don't worry, I know that the board looks quite intimidating, but at least I hope that I will give you some tools and how to simplify these calculations. We're actually going to start with what I'm wearing. And today I'm wearing a modified Siri. Siri is a design by a Swedish designer that I should have remember the name, Linnea Ölund, I think her name is. A Swedish designer. I think that this design is available both in Swedish and English. But it's quite an old design and it has been very popular, at least in Sweden. And it's actually a cardigan from the beginning, or as an original. And it's knitted in DK or sport weight yarn. So this CD has been knitted by a lot of people. And I have never knitted it. I have never felt the need to knit it. Perhaps because I'm not that keen on cardigans. I hardly ever wear them. I prefer a sweater or pullover. And also, when something is knitted by everybody, I feel like, okay, then I don't have to knit it. And I also heard a lot of people like cursing Siri because they find the, especially this texture pattern, quite difficult. And it's really difficult to kind of fix something if you see that something has gone wrong. And a couple of weeks ago, I think it was in the end of my vacation, I knitted together with some friends, and one of them were knitting a CD, and we talked about CD and how many people cursing CD. And after that day, I thought, what? I'm a little bit curious. What is all the fuss about? Why is CD such a challenge for so many? And I thought that, okay, I want to make a CD, but I want to make my CD. And I looked through my stash, and I have this color, because if you're going to have a texture pattern, then you need to have a color or a yarn that shows the texture. If I would have a color that is very a busy color, then you wouldn't see it. So I need to have a yarn that is a little bit clean, that doesn't have that much variation in the color. And I had this colorway that's called a ball in Nutiden. And as you know, I'm almost only knitting in Nutiden. It has turned out that way because I have tested many different kind of yarns. And I have realized that I like this yarn best. So I tried it out. I cast it on the same evening. And I thought that, okay, I want to have a sweater. And I did some calculation, checked out the description, how many stitches that I would need, and so on, and modified it to become something that fitted me, because the pattern said like needles 3.5, and I have been using kind of maybe 6 millimeters in the yoke. So it's total recalculation. And I also didn't do the full texture pattern, because then the texture would have continued quite low. And yeah, so I modified it. And if you want to know how I modified it, I have on my Instagram page under these kind of circles with highlights. One of those highlights says my CD or something. And there I have all the different posts that I posted on how I modified CD. Not exactly by how many numbers, and you need to have the pattern, the CD pattern, to actually be able to knit this version. Because I don't explain anything that has to do with the texture. So it's only my modification I show. And I also talk a little about what I wanted with this sweater. But this is how it turned out. And perfect fit. And if it was skills or luck, I'm not sure. But perfect fit, a little bit longer in the back, and these kind of short or half-length sleeves. So I'm very happy with this. It's a perfect kind of in-between season sweater. But this required some calculations to be able to modify the original pattern for the CD cardigan to my modified CD pullover. Yeah, so this is what you can do if you kind of master a little bit on how you can do the math. Okay, I better get started and see if we can, with some kind of sense out of this. I'm going to confess something first. I don't swatch. I don't swatch for gauge. I can do a swatch to see how a yarn turns out, what kind of fabric it gives, what size of needle I should have to get the fabric I want, how a texture pattern turns out in a specific yarn. For that I can do a swatch, but I don't swatch for gauge. And I know that every designer says it is so important that you do a swatch, that you have the right needles and find the right gauge and then wash it and measure it and so on. I have never done that. And I will probably not start doing that because I don't feel the need for it. And also because I don't really believe in it. And I guess I will have a lot of designers turning against me, but this is my opinion. And why I don't really believe in it is that when you do a swatch, you are very focused on doing that swatch. And that gauge, it can be difficult to hold that specific gauge for a whole garment. Because if you're knitting like a sweater, and in the beginning, if you have it a top-down sweater, it's easy, it's quite not that much fabric to hold in your knee or in your lap. And then you continue knitting. And when you get down here, it's a little bit difficult. It's heavier and it will pull and change gauge. And also when you add the arms and you have a heavy, or maybe you are in different moods. One day you are quite tired. Maybe you are knitting a little bit looser, and another day you are quite angry and you're knitting really tight. So through a garment, your gauge will change. And that's why I don't really believe in doing these swatches and exactly measuring how many stitches you will have per 10 centimeters or per inch. It can give you a hint on where you are, but you need more to have that perfect fitting garment. You cannot only rely on the swatch. And I have, when there have been different knit-alongs and so on, there are people who have done their swatch exactly, but still the garment don't fit. Because in the end, it will not, they haven't hold that perfect gauge through the whole garment. Was there anything more? I prepared for this episode when I was out hiking up in the Swedish mountains. So then I took my little black book and I prepared some notes for this episode. So we'll see if I remember everything I planned to say. Yeah, some coffee. I have been working all day, so excuse me if I appear a little bit tired, or if I appear as a little bit confusing or confused, or So I don't swatch. If you are totally new to a specific yarn or something, do a swatch just to get to know the yarn. And then you can see, okay, what needles are best to use and approximately what gauge does it give. But you cannot really only rely on the swatch. What I do as like the main method, it is what I call reference method. And what that is that I have knitted so many garments. So I have learned approximately how many stitches do I need for my neck with that yarn and those needles. Approximately how many stitches do I need for the body? How many stitches do I need for the arm? How many stitches do I need to have around the body or shoulders before I divide for body and arms? So I have learned those figures that I have like approximately. And that helps me when I want to modify something. And it is mainly the reference method that I will talk about today. And what I've written down here, it's approximately those reference figures or numbers that I am using. So if I'm knitting something in like worsted, Aran weight yarn or 2 strands of nutiden, for the neck, I usually have about, and say that this is maybe 4.5 millimeters or 5 millimeters, approximately there. So for the neck, between 80 and 90 stitches, depending on how close or tight I want the neck to be. So about there. 80 gives a tighter neck, 90 a little bit wider neck. So for this one, I think I started with 80 and then I increased to about 90. And 240, we can say 220 to 240, it is the numbers I need to have before I divide for arms and body. So approximately. And 180, approximately, it is how many stitches I want to have around my body to have like a nice ease on it. So approximately, maybe 170 up to 190, depending on the number of ease. And that means that I will add, say, about 4 to 8 stitches under the arm when I cast them under the arm. So maybe I will have about 80 stitches for the front, 80 for the back, and then cast on and pick up about maybe between 5 and 10 stitches under each arm. And that will give about 180. So I know that, okay, that is what I need. And for the arms, about between 50 and 60 stitches. So that is what I want to have for the arm. And that means that those stitches that I will like divide for the arm, it is about 45 to 50 stitches. And then I will pick up under the arm to add the rest of those stitches. So those are my kind of reference numbers. And if I knit something with smaller needles, thinner yarn, then I have maybe start with 100, maybe I will need 260, 280, and so on. And if I knit something with larger needles, I think that I had about 200 stitches before I divided on this one. And that was, I think, 6 millimeters for this one. And I wanted to have it with not that much positive ease. So I think I have about 200 stitches here. So then I will have a smaller number with larger needles. So the reference method is what I am mainly using when I am designing something for myself and also modifying a pattern. And I will talk more about that later. I also choose a construction that means that I can try the garment on as it goes. And you know, probably if you knit a sweater bottom up, you need to cast on the right amount of stitches from the beginning. And if you had too many or too few stitches from the beginning, the whole garment will be more or less ruined and you have to frog it and start all over again. If you do it a top down, then you can try it on as it goes. And when you see that, okay, now it's enough, then I stop increasing or depending on the construction. And that also has to do with a toe up sock. The Kura sock that I have right now, the recipe available on my YouTube channel. It is a toe-up sock that you can use any yarn for, because you are doing the increases until it's wide enough. If you do a top-down sock, then you have to cast on the right numbers of stitches for that yarn from the beginning. And you cannot really change your mind as it goes. But with a toe up, you can change your mind, or you can modify it. So choosing the construction that actually helps you in doing the math, or actually calculating and getting the best fit, that also helps you, and you don't have to do that much calculation, and you don't have to do that swatching for gauge. And that gives the third bullet I have here. I don't know if I found the right word, but you need to look at the garment and look at, is this reasonable that it should be this size? So you cannot just knit your garment from the beginning to the end, bind off, and then try it on. And even if you're knitting something bottom up, you need to look at it. Does it look too big or too small? Is this reasonable that this should be this size? Even if you cannot try it on, you can measure a little bit. You can take your measurement tape. Yeah, you know what I mean. You can measure and see, is this reasonable compared to the measurements I have on my body? So have this little bit critical eye on your garment and see, okay, is it reasonable? Will this fit? Even if it's not for you, it's for someone you're planning on giving it, that could be larger than you or smaller than you or a kid. Does this look okay? Because I'm so surprised when I see, mostly on Facebook in these knitting communities, someone who has knitted something and then try it on when it's finished and it's too big. And they're like, okay, but does that come as a surprise to you? Haven't you looked at your garment during the journey, during the process? So just check it out. And that you can do no matter what kind of method you use, or you should always do it even if you're following a pattern. Just have the critical eye. Is this reasonable? Should it be like this? Or is there something wrong with my gauge? Or have I misunderstood the pattern and done too many increases or too few increases, and so on? Because the most important thing is not that you follow the pattern, it is that it fits your body. So the pattern is just a help for you to get the garment that you want. So I prefer the reference method, and then just looking at it. Is this reasonable? And trying it on. Plus having a construction that helps me to try the garment on and see what it will become. Many descriptions or patterns helps you with the calculation. If you are going to do some even increases or decreases, many patterns say that you should knit 5, knit 2 together, or knit 5, do 1, make 1 right, make 1 left. But there are also many patterns, a little bit depending on designer, a little bit depending on, I think, from what country this designer is, so what's this custom there, and also if it's an older or newer pattern. There is a trend in pattern making to be very, very detailed and tell the knitter exactly what to do. Older pattern has often been a little bit more like a guide through it, and it requires the knitter to think more on its own. But I've seen all these different kind of patterns, and quite recently I knitted a pattern where it said something like decrease 6 stitches evenly. And if you get that, you need to do some calculation. And when you don't have to have it exactly as it should be exactly even, but you need to have it more or less even, so it doesn't become crooked in any way. And I know that many find that kind of, okay, I should do that kind of calculation on my own very difficult. And many are searching for different apps to do the calculation for you. I know that there are those kind of apps. I have never used it. I am not good at math. I was it when I was younger and a student. I was to this basic school, high school, and so on. But now I'm not really good at math. But I find it's exercising your brain sometimes is quite good. So how I think when I get that kind of, if I have, that I said here, 90 stitches, and I should decrease 6 stitches evenly. How I'm thinking then is that I'm using the piece of cake method. I have to name some method, the reference method and now the piece of cake method. So I have a hat beanie that is 90 stitches and I should decrease evenly 6 stitches. What I do then, it is that I take 90 divided by 6. It's because I want to have these pieces of cake. So if I divide how many stitches I should decrease with this number I have. So 90 divided by 6 is 15. And if I should have like 92 divided by 6, I would have 15 point something. But just be approximately and find a number. And that means that if I want to decrease, that means that my piece of the cake is 15 stitches. So I only will need to think that of these 15 stitches should be 14, since I should decrease 1 stitch in my piece of cake. So what I do then is that I knit 13 stitches and then I knit 2 together. In that way, my 15 stitches have become 14 stitches. And on the next row, maybe I should decrease another 6 stitches. That means that I have in my piece of cake, I have 14 stitches. That means that I want to decrease that one to 13 stitches. So I knit 12 stitches and then knit 2 together. We take another example that I haven't written here, and that piece of cake is not like related to those kind of figures, just so you know. Because this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces, not 6 pieces. Just so you understand that I know what I'm doing, I think. But we take another example that you should increase. We can take that what I did here. I had 80 stitches and I would increase to 90 stitches. That means that I will increase 10 stitches. That means that I take 80 divide by 10. And that means I get my piece of cake is 8 stitches. And what I do then is that I knit 8 stitches and then make 1 stitch, left or right, or what kind of method I want to use to increase 1 stitch. Knit another 8 stitches and make 1 stitch. That means that 8 stitches has become 9 stitches. And since I have 10 pieces in my cake, then 80 stitches will become 90 stitches. So if you think about that, like dividing your full cake into pieces of cake, and then you see how many stitches should I knit before I either knit 2 together or make 1 stitch, to then increase or decrease to the number of stitches that I should have. So the piece of cake method. And that makes this kind of maybe a huge challenge to increase or decrease a number of stitches evenly, that in the first place feels like very confusing. If you do like this, take it down to something, a little piece of cake. It makes it a piece of cake. Isn't that great? That was that. Now we go to the circular yoke. And when you do a circular yoke with a stranded, some kind of color work or texture pattern, then you usually start with closer to the neck. It's few numbers of stitches, and then you increase and it becomes more number of stitches. And I'm going to show you, and this is my own design, and well, it's not for you to copy and somehow, but I'm going to show you. This is a prototype for something I would probably knit up. But here you see, I start up here with 4 stitches. As I spoke in the latest episode about the increasing, I have more increases in the beginning. And then in the end, I have 12 stitches. So the pattern repeat is like a triangle, or what you can call it, with few numbers in the beginning or the top and more numbers. And in this one I have like the pattern report or repeat is 4, and then I increase to 12. And that ratio between those numbers is a little bit, but approximately that kind of ratio in most of those stranded work pattern repeats. But they could be more or less depending on the design. What I think here, if I would have taken this, I've just been given this pattern repeat, I want to make a sweater with that, and using the reference method. How I think then, it is to look at the bottom number and see, okay, if the bottom of the pattern repeat is 12 stitches, how many of those repeats do I need to get to my reference number that we talked about 240? Yeah, that gives that if I have 20 repeats of this pattern repeat report, what is it called? You understand. Then I will get 240. And that will be then enough for my body. If I use like kind of worsted and needles 4.5 millimeters and have some positive ease. And that means that if I have these 20 repeats, it means that I need to, when I start the pattern, I will need to have like 4 times 20. I will need to have 80 stitches. So that means that up here 80 stitches, and then I make sure that I have done these 80 or 20 pattern repeats, and then I will be able to work the pattern, and in the end I will have 240 stitches. So that's why it's quite simple to just adjust, and you can take any of these patterns for a stranded yoke and adapt it. What you need to think about it is that it's more difficult to adapt in the depth of the yoke. So you cannot take away the increases, but you may have to shorten the pattern for the yoke so it fits your body. Since you have the gauge for the width and you have the gauge for the depth, both those gauges are affected when you are changing needle size and yarn. So if I would use this pattern for a garment with very thin needles, it would be like quite short, probably. And if I will use this in 3 strands of Nutiden, I guess that I will have to like cut it or continue after I have divided for the arms and the body. But that is how you can think when you want to adapt a circular yoke with a stranded, the color work yoke sweater. And that's quite easy. If you have another circular yoke with just, I'm tired, with one color, then you can think the same as in using your reference number. It's just increasing in the same, what do you call it, ratio as is stated. Maybe you need to have that ratio a little bit closer up here to actually have the increases in the top of the yoke, but then make sure that you increase until you have those number of stitches that you need to have for your body, for the reference, or you try it on, of course. So that was the circular yoke. Then we come to the raglan. And raglan it's easier to do the increases. So I spoke about this last episode when I made some tips on how you can modify different sweater constructions. But when you have like set your raglan marker, those markers that you need, then you just do every second round, more or less, on each side of the marker for the arm and for the body, and you just continue until it's wide enough. And if you think that, okay, the body's wide enough, but the arm is not wide enough yet, then you just continue increasing for the arm and vice versa. What is the difficult part when you have this raglan construction? It is the setup, to have those markers on the right places. And I have a picture here I've tried. So this is the neck. And this is like when it's done before you divide it for arms. And then you have like the raglan seams, but it's not seams since you are increasing on it. So you need to have the setup for your markers on where you should increase. And here you need to learn your body. And the best way is to to find a raglan design that you feel like, okay, I like this one. It has a good ratio for my shoulders and how I look, the size of my like front and back. So that is the best way to learn to have like a template for your setup. But what you can think a little bit about, it's a little bit about the same way as up here. It is that, as I said, for my arms, I need to have like, okay, about 40 to 45 stitches before and then I will add those stitches that I pick up under the arm. So I will need from these 240, at least 40 will be for the arm and about 80 will be for my body. And then you can work your way up and see, okay, if I do even increases and just in my imagination do some decreases, even if it means that I should, of those 80 stitches I have on my neck, 15 should be for each arm and 30 should be for each, or 90 I mean. So from those 90 stitches I have for the neck, 15 should be for the arms and 30 for the front and back. And that means total of 90 stitches. So that will be the setup. And then I will increase every second round. And that means that I will have 40 stitches for my arm and 80 stitches for my front and back. If you want to have less stitches for the arm, either you have that same like setup in the beginning and do less increases, or maybe you have 12 stitches here and 33 stitches there and doing evenly increases. So that is how you can see how you are doing the setup. And if you have done not the best setup, if you feel like, okay, now I'm going to have too much for the arm or too much for my body, if it's not too much, so it's obvious that it's like just bulky, then you can just adjust it by like stop increasing on either the arms or the body, front and back, and like adjust it for that way. So you don't have to frog it or rip it up all the way up. But if you have very narrow shoulders and have, this might be on the largest side, too many stitches to have for your shoulder, then maybe you should have less, perhaps just 10 stitches or 8 stitches. So you can have a nice, properties between body and arm. And if you have a narrow shoulder, it may be better to have less stitches in the setup for the arm, but increase longer and stop increasing for the body to have a nice ratio or symmetry. What do you call it? They should look nice and have a good fit. But that's my way of thinking when I do the raglan. And also here, it's a reference method. I know that, okay, if I have 80 or 90 stitches, it will be about between 10 and 15 stitches for the shoulders, and it will be about 30 or 35 or something like that for the front and back. Another thing that I haven't brought up here is increasing or decreasing for the arms. And it also says in in pattern description how often, how many rows you should have between the increases or decreases. And my reference method on this one, it is that I decrease, since I do top down, every eighth row. So I knit 7 rows, and the next row I do the decrease. But that may be different between everybody because it depends on how long arms you have. I have long arms, and also how the ratio between your upper arm and your lower arm and your wrists. And what you can do is actually measuring your arm. How long is it? And then you measure to the point where you think that, okay, now I should stop the decreases, because your arm, I have quite thin arm, but still it's a little bit bigger up here, and then it goes thinner and thinner. But when it's here, it's quite evenly. And that means that I should do my decreases to about here. And then I will just knit. And then I will measure my arm from this point and up to here and see. And then you look at, okay, how many stitches do I have when I start? And how many stitches do I need to have down here? And I will usually decrease to about 38 to 40 stitches. That would be a good, as my reference method, number of stitches. And then I just take those. Say that I have 60 stitches up here, and I want to have 40 stitches down here. It's 20 stitches that I need to decrease. That means that I will have 10 sets of decrease, since I decrease 2 stitches on every time I decrease. And if I have maybe 40 centimeters and I have 10 sets of decreases, it means that every 4th centimeter I should do a decrease. And if I just, in the beginning, I measure 4 centimeters and then see how many rows was that, and that was maybe 7 rows. Okay, then I know that, okay, I will do a decrease on every 7th row. And then you have done your own calculations. Quite easy. Yeah, the reference method. And trying things on. Choose a construction that helps you with the necessary calculations or limit the need of different calculations. And a construction method that means that you can actually try the garment on, so you can see, is this reasonable? Should it look like this? Is it big enough or small enough for me? Or have I done something wrong? And I'm sorry, I don't do swatches for gauge. If someone would ask me what gauge I had in this sweater, I had no idea, because I haven't measured my swatch or a gauge for this. I just knit. I know that I done this with 3 strands and used needle 6.5 or something like that. Yeah, I think that was what I had planned to say about calculation. And I think that if you just at least feel like this is not an obstacle for you, that you feel like, okay, I can master this. I don't feel intimidating by doing this kind of calculations, or the number is not something that frightens me. I think that will open up even more in your creativity and your willingness to just throw yourself out there, to be courageous in your creativity and just see where it can take you. So don't be afraid of the numbers. They are your friend when you are knitting, because knitting and numbers, they are so closely linked together. So think that every stitch is a number and let it become your friend. And like Pippi Longstocking, be brave. My own design for this episode is this cardigan that I call Mai. And the name is inspired by the name of the color. The color is called Mai. And Mai is Swedish for the month May. And I did this one this spring when this colorway came out. I think it was a part of the June collection or May collection. Could have been May collection since the name. And if you follow me on Instagram, you have probably seen it, and you've probably seen this cardigan also in some picture of Höner och Ejer, since they borrowed the cardigan from me. And I made a video showing you how this one was constructed, and I recorded that video quite a long time ago. So I'm happy that I recorded it, because I don't really remember the construction of it. And I know that it's knitted bottom up. I tried that way. And that is a way that I don't really like, and I don't get a perfect fit from it. But I'm using the calculation method on this one, and I will tell you about that one in the video. So it's not a perfect fit. It's a little bit too tight up here over the shoulders or the arms. But if I don't have too much clothes underneath, I can still wear it. So yeah, it's a cute little cardigan. And if you're interested in being inspired by it or knit something similar on your own, then I hope that this video will help you. Hello and welcome to the part in the episode where I talk about one of my designs. And I try to explain the thoughts behind, the inspiration, and the process. Today I will talk about my cardigan Mai, or maybe it's a jacket Mai. And the inspiration behind it is at least 3 different inspirations. The first inspiration is the yarn, and the yarn is from Nutiden. It's a Nutiden yarn from Höner och Ejer that I'm usually knitting in. And this is from the collection May in 2021. And what inspired me is the color, but maybe not just the color itself. You can see that the color is pale or very light yellow. It's a little bit different yellows, but still it's very gentle. And it doesn't have any grays in it. So the color, when it's knitted up, to avoid it from getting like flat, my inspiration was to try to give depth for this color by using texture. So that was my first inspiration, the yarn. The second inspiration was this lace panel that you see here. And this is a lace panel that I found on a sweater that's called Vatsland, that is made by Ella Gordon, who is a designer from Shetland. So the lace was my second inspiration. And the third inspiration was actually to challenge myself in knitting something bottom up. And normally I do my garments, my sweater and cardigans, top down, because that is what I think is the most convenient way to knit. But I wanted to challenge myself in actually doing something bottom up. Just to remind myself that I'm still able to do it, to freshen up on what are the pros and cons on actually knitting bottom up. So based on those three inspirations, I then thought, okay, how do I want this to look? I was pretty sure that I wanted to have a cardigan or a little jacket to be worn to like a dress or a skirt. So something quite light, feminine. And to be honest, I didn't have the full design in my head clear when I started. I just wanted to start with this lace panel. And what I did, since I didn't follow any patterns or something, and since I started and knit this bottom up, it's not like when you start increasing and then you increase until you are happy when you do a top-down construction. What I had to do here is actually to decide how many stitches do I need. So, and I didn't do any swatch. The swatching I did was just to experiment a little bit with what kind of texture looked good in this yarn. So no texture for gauge at all. So what I used to get the right amount of stitches, it was to use the reference method. And since I'm knitting this with needle 5 millimeters, I think, I know that, okay, somewhere between 160, 180 stitches is what I need for the body. So I looked at this lace panel and the pattern repeat, I made it so it was 10 stitches. So between those two, the repeat between those is 10 stitches. And then I added this, the edge, or whatever you call it, the panel here. I knew that I didn't want any buttons. So even if I have like a button band, I didn't want to have any buttons. So I saw that, okay, if I have a pattern report or pattern repeat that is over 10 stitches plus 6 stitches for this edge and 6 stitches on the other, then I counted like, okay, 15 of these lace repeats that will give me 150, and then plus 6 will give approximately 160 stitches, and that will give a quite fitted garment. And since I wasn't intending to have it with buttons, it didn't matter if those, called the edge, this bottom band or whatever you call it, they didn't necessarily need to overlap, because that could be open. So I would rather have a garment that was a little bit on the negative ease than to have something that was too big and became bulky. And I don't think that to have like a cardigan to wear with a dress, then at least I don't want to have it too big or bulky. Then it should be a little bit more fitted. So I cast it on, and I used the chain method for casting on. And then I just started knitting the lace. And this lace pattern automatically makes these, you get this zigzaggy edge that I think is very beautiful. And that was one of the reasons that I fell for this lace pattern. And I thought that, okay, I want to have a rather wide, broad lace section that goes from my upper hip bone to my waist. So I knitted that, and then I was starting to think, okay, how will the rest look? So when I'm knitting this lace panel, then I can start planning ahead. And then I thought that, okay, this lace panel, as you see, it is knitted in like garter stitch. It's like lace garter stitch. And it gives it a little bit more stability. But then I thought that, okay, if I continue with that, it will get very thick. It's a possibility that it will be maybe a bit too warm to wear. So I thought that, okay, I want to have panels of stockinette just to ease it up a little bit. But I still wanted to have lace panels that goes all the way up in the design. And I wanted to be next to this, I call it a button band, even if it's not with any button. I probably have another word that I cannot come up with right now. And I wanted it to be on the side. And also I wanted to have this lace panel going all the way up along the back and the spine. So I continued knitting, and I had to estimate how many divided for the back and the front. So here you can see that I have 5 of these repeats or lace reports on the back. I have 2 on the side, and that means that for the front panel I have this 1, 2, 3. So that was, and then I just continued knitting until I felt like, okay, now the body is long enough. And then I started knitting the arms, and they are also knitted bottom up. So I cast it on, but here I felt like, okay, I don't want to have like lace panels all the way around, but I want to have one that goes all the way up to the shoulder. So one lace panel. And then I got this little claw coming down here. But I made a cuff with garter stitch, quite wide, and then continue with stockinette. And I wanted to have that the length of the arm should be approximately just below the elbow. So rather not fully length, but covering the elbow, because I think that if you have like a woolen cardigan that it is, it will be quite warm. And when I put something on that is warm, it's probably because I am cold. If I have a short sleeve, then I will still be cold on my arms. And to put something on under the cardigan, just to cover the sleeves or my arms, it will look quite funny. So I wanted to have quite long, but not full length of my sleeves. So I knitted the 2 sleeves. And then it comes what I think. So when we come to the construction of these bottom-up construction, I think that knitting the arms and the body from bottom and up to where you actually are going to attach everything, that's quite relaxing, because you work in smaller pieces and you can bring the knitting with you somewhere. And I think that's quite nice part of knitting. But then it comes to putting it all together. It's not that I find it difficult to do it. You just need to have your mouth or the tongue right in your mouth to get it. And here I was thinking, how should the yoke look like? And I was considering, should I continue with a stockinette all the way up? What I was sure was that I shouldn't continue with this lace panel, because since I am decreasing all the way up, using this where you decrease 2 stitches at the same time, since I was doing that, it would be a little bit challenging to continue with this kind of lace panel and getting it right. So I was debating, should I have stockinette or should I go for garter stitch? And I actually decided on the garter stitch because it gives the garment a little bit more structure. It holds a little bit better. Since it's a cardigan, but I think I want to see it a little bit like a jacket, a light summer jacket. And then I think that the garter stitch gives it a little bit more, a structure. And then I mean the structure, not just texture, but a structure. And a little bit more, since it's a raglan that goes up, and you see it gets a little bit squared with visible edges. And I think that's more like a jacket style than just a pretty cardigan. So I continued, just decreasing all the way up, having lace panels along the front, from the arms, and also here on the back. So in total of 5 lace panels that just continue all the way. I'll show it in this direction instead. And then I came to the neck. And what I actually did here was I don't like cardigans when the neck line, it starts to grow and slides down and it becomes quite big. So what I did here, it was that I actually made, it looks like it's ribbing, but it's actually not. It's actually knit one, slip one, knit one, slip one, and slip with a yarn in front. So it's something that I call for double knitting. So Some of you may have seen that technique when it comes to this tubular cast on or bind up, when you do this kind of double knitting in the beginning or in the end, just to make it almost looks like it's double layering. So I made 6 rounds or something of this kind of double knitting. So slip one, knit one, slip one with yarn in front, so it looks like a pearl. And why I did it is because since I'm slipping and having the yarn in front, it's not as elastic as this. If you see here, and then I have here, it's a little bit less elastic. So I'm hoping that this will mean that it will last a little bit longer. And then I continued and I made the color with the lace panels. And now you see that I've gone from 15 lace repeats down to 5. So that you can see how the decrease have been, or actually I had 15 plus 1 on each arm, so 17 lace repeats has been decreased to just 5. And I wanted to have a quite long collar to have it been able to stand up and warm the neck, but also hang down like a little bit of, a nice color. Not color as in color, but in color. So this is my cardigan. It's a little bit difficult to show a big garment in this way. Knitting in 2 strands of Nutiden. I use, I think, about 300 grams for this. And I use the needle 5 millimeters. This is not a garment that I will produce any pattern or description, so you can make it. No, I will not do that. But I think that by this description I have provided here, if you want to copy it or remake it in your own way, I think that my description here will be well enough for someone who is an experienced knitter. Will I make this one again for my own? Yeah, I like this lace pattern. I think that's very versatile. I also like the color and the neck in doing it in this way, and it's a little bit more dressed than an ordinary just ribbing neckline. So having this, it looks a little bit regal. It's royal to having it like that, and also like having quite a square shaped that these garter lines make, gives it more like a jacket style. So I think that, maybe I will knit something similar again. I would probably do it top down, because then you can do the calculation up here and make it, instead of trying just to adapt when you come from below and try to make the yoke fit. So I think that I will make it, but then top down instead, and that will be just as easy to make it that way. So this is my jacket. Hope you like it. This is the end of episode number 5. So I'm halfway through those 10 episodes that I was planning on making, as I mentioned in the introduction episode. And it's time for some reflection. I have made 2 episodes that explored who I am as a knitter, and why do I knit and how do I knit. And then I did 1 episode on where to find inspiration in different places, in books, on different kind of books. And then I made episode number 4 in different sweater constructions that are part of the knowledge you need to know to be creative. And this episode's in doing the math. So I've been trying to mix this by knowing yourself, where you are right now, and mixing those parts that I think builds up the creativity, the inspiration, the knowledge and the skills, and the last one, courage. So now it's time to make a decision. Should I continue? Or should I stop here? Should I record the next 5 episodes or not? I thank you so much for all of you that have made comments and shared parts of your journey and how you have used my videos to learn and develop yourself. I see that these podcasts on creativity, it's not entertaining. It's not entertainment that the more easy to watch podcasts that I have done before, that is more about showing a lot of things. The podcast on creativity is more of actually, it's requiring more from the viewer, for the viewer to have some kind of payoff on it. So it's more like taking a course or an education. You cannot learn unless you actually put some effort in it. So it requires more from you as a viewer, I think, to appreciate it. And I have seen in a number of viewers that it's less now than I had when I was doing some kind of normal or the ordinary podcast that I had in Sweden, or I made it in Swedish. So there are fewer or less views right now. And I would lie if I said that it doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter, but I had a little bit expected more since I do this in English, that I would reach more viewers. But it's not that makes that decides on whether I should. It's not that I make my decision on if I should continue or not. As I said in the introduction video, I do this in English, and I do this in the way, this kind of theme and the concept is actually for myself to develop. But at the same time, if no one is appreciating it, then it feels like a lot of time spent for nothing. And I can use that time for myself instead. So I want you to help me making that decision. And I want you to, even if you usually are not doing it, I want that if you think that I should continue, I want you to press the thumbs up. And if you see like, okay, no, you can stop now because this was not what I expected, then you press the thumbs down. Then I kind of see the general. But I also want you to answer 2 questions. And the first question is, what of those episodes that I recorded so far have you liked? Have you really appreciated? So what have you, or what parts of it? Because those designs that I have shown, I haven't got a single comment on it. So then maybe I shouldn't continue showing those things because no one is actually appreciating it. Or maybe you are appreciating it, but you haven't commented. So I want to know what in those previous episodes have you really appreciated and what parts of it. So that I would really love to know, because that helps me in what I should put in the coming episodes or what I shouldn't put in. And you cannot have, okay, I cannot stop you, but I have already a plan for the coming episodes. So having a wish for things, that is not what I'm requiring from you. Because my experience from when people are making wishes for what I should put in episodes is usually things that are already out there. It's easily accessible by Googling. It's on YouTube. There are other podcasters that have been talking about this. So my podcast now for this on creativity, it is to publish things that you cannot easily find out there. So the first question, what have you liked so far? And the second question is that what my plan was for episode number 10, this slipover or vest called Huldra. This is the first prototype with a hood, and I have another prototype with pockets, and I am planning on making the final prototype or the final version that will have a hood and it will have pockets. So this is like just the first prototype. And that comes to my second question is, do you want me to make this description or this recipe for the Huldra vest or Huldra pullover? Will you knit it if I publish that video recipe? Because if no one wants to knit it, why should I do all the work to provide a recipe, a video recipe or a pattern? So what have you liked so far? And if I publish this recipe of Huldra, will you knit it? And based on those answers, I will make a decision on how I will continue this on creativity. Yeah, I think that was all for today. So continue knitting. Be calm. Don't get frightened or stressed out by the numbers. And as Pippi Longstocking, be strong, be kind, What? And be brave. I hope that I will see you in the next episode, but I cannot promise. Take care.